Hey there, welcome to another exciting episode of Pulling Weeds. I'm your co-host, Ozark Nation. All of us known as Michael. Our other co-host, Jeffrey. How you doing this week, Jeffrey?
Doing well, guys. Nice to be with you. It's been a couple weeks. Life is definitely busy at the end of spring, going into summer. So just trying to catch up with all the responsibilities in life.
I believe that. Getting pretty busy in the garden.
I'm trying to, yeah. Popped a lot of heirloom popcorn, probably a little bit too much. I'm going to try to convince my buddy to grow some of it at his farm. But yeah, I was looking around yesterday. I got like 12 or 15 different heirloom tomatoes in the ground. Gonna focus probably a little bit more on cherry tomatoes this year because they tend to do better. I was still harvesting cherry tomatoes in like February in my back garden, and all the other tomatoes kind of struggled. But yeah, I got some melons, some couple cukes, some squash in the ground, and still got some weeding to do, just kind of letting the biomass grow, as it were. But yeah, my garlic's doing good. I never grown garlic before, so that's kind of exciting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, gonna pull some onions and potatoes here soon, and plant some more potatoes in smart pots like I like to do, and yeah, just kind of flowing with it, and excited about some soil consulting that I'm doing and learning from, and some of the additives we're going to get through them and probably put it in my backyard. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate the direction that you provided for me with this company, just in terms of like trying to get balanced minerally and create nutrient dense foods.
Yeah, and I think some of those products are pretty nice for just kind of like healing the soil up too a little bit and kind of creating a nice stable environment for the microbes to do their thing in a better environment instead of having to fight whatever's going on. I mean, the idea is hopefully, like you're in an established spot, so there's probably not too much to really fix, but there's always something. I mean, when there's glyphosate in the rain and organic wines are testing positive for glyphosate and breast milk tests positive for glyphosate, like, it's always there to fix.
Yeah, one of the metaphors that the gentleman I spoke to this morning shared with me that I liked, that I'm going to try to keep in the forefront of my mind moving forward, was that fixing the soil is like trying to move a 5-ton elephant with a Q-tip, and it's going to happen really slowly.
Yeah.
That is a really good perspective that he shared with me, that in terms of, we're going to have to do some liquid fertilizers and some drip and some overhead feeding and some foliar feeding. And foliar feeding isn't necessarily just the answer, because as you foliar feed, you're promoting the plant to dig up nutrients from the soil and to go looking for them, to balance what you're giving them. So I've always been a big proponent of hitting it from all angles. I think that when you talk to people that are, consulting on 80 to 500 acres, it gives you a really good perspective. One of the other things that he shared with me was, I preach a lot about organic matter content in the soil through my current job. And he made the point that doesn't mean that the carbon is activated if you have higher organic matter. And a lot of times, the higher the organic matter, the less the carbon is activated. So they really focus on activating the carbon so that the nutrients are actually available that you're looking for. Just because they're there doesn't mean that they're available. So this is a new perspective. It makes sense to me. I'm looking forward to learning about it. But yeah, I mean, it's a long road. The consultant I spoke with seemed to think that we're very much in a collapse environment in agriculture worldwide currently, which is scary to hear, but at the same time, it's motivating. You know, I think you and I both often think about how we can make a lasting legacy or impression on the world, or you know, put forth efforts that help people most efficiently. And it's really interesting at my age, I'm getting closer to 50, to think that the way to do that is going back to farming and creating food. And this spring and summer has been really motivating for me in that direction, which is a little bit shocking and scary. But at the same time, like, of the other things, I listened to Ed Dowd interview this morning, and he's a really knowledgeable guy that worked, managed a $14 billion fund for BlackRock, among many other things, and did some really interesting research after COVID. And he was saying that, he thinks that we're in a 1.5 to 5 year economic collapse. So that being the case, whether it's a 1.5 years, whether it's 5 years, whether it's 10 years down the road, like, where do you want to be when that happens? And being around the ability to produce food is certainly where I want to be. And not relying on maybe a company to produce food for me, so to speak.
Yeah. Or even, even if they exist to make it, you still have to get it transported also. And how long is that, infrastructure going to last for all that? So, there's kind of like a phrase I've heard where it's like living a life where only God can turn the lights out, which is kind of something where we'd like to get to, where, whatever electricity we need, we can either run off of our solar power or whatever is generated and have a bank. And, maybe we don't live quite the lavish lifestyle that we do now with all the electrical amenities, but, raising our own chickens and stuff like that, and eventually have a dairy cow and some goats and stuff like that for meat and growing more. I got to get my potato game up to your level, man, because I suck at growing potatoes, but we eat way too many potatoes and sweet potatoes for me to buy them.
Just got to find a shady place in your yard. I think it's a little bit your environment and the humidity, but I'm sure once you put your mind to it, I've noticed for me that when I plant in like late March, bugs definitely attack my potatoes. And that may not be the case as I get more nutritionally sound. I think I've definitely been relying a little bit on the 40-pound bag of gypsum I got 2 years ago that I still tend to feed often. And I'm recognizing that my soil is very clayey and probably pretty magnesium rich. So using that as often as I have been is probably not the move. I don't think I've had lockup yet, but I don't think I'm having really efficient process. But if you compare the plantings that I've done, late March compared to first week of May or second week of May, I mean, I have one 30, 45 gallon pot outside that's just so lush. And I'm like, dude, maybe I should just plant all my potatoes at that time. And you helped me think about that actually this past week when we spoke, and you were talking about, not overwatering peppers when the ground's cold, and the perspective of, peppers, whether they're from New Mexico or from the Caribbean, and how they're going to adapt to the environment that they're in. And, that goes back to terroir, which is a constant evolutionary process for a farmer. And, I am constantly reminded of it. And of course, I feel like I keep it in my mind, but it's like, it's always evolving. So how do you keep up with that? And I think that you may find that, in your climate, planting potatoes in February is better than planting them in May. And that's something that I would play with. It's probably earlier than later.
Yeah, it's I mean, every farm has its own microclimate. You can go one farm to the next and it has different things. I mean, you go down to Florida and literally your next door neighbor might not get the same freeze that you got. It's wild. But, and definitely, like you said, the humidity and stuff like that here, it really, just being in the subtropical environment, really everything cycles through the carbon really fast. That's definitely something that's always kind of, I found to be something that I have to address when it comes to farming on this property down here. It just eats everything so quick. And then there's so many bugs, and the micro life just goes so hard because it's just, it never gets that cold for them really. You know, every now and then we get a freak freeze that kills things, but not very often. And we did better last time when you sent those potato slips that I lost. But I grew them really well. And then we went out of town, and when we came back, hornworms had just destroyed them. And I tried to bring them back, and they had ate so much of the vines and foliage that I just couldn't bring them back. And the slips were just gone. So.
Yeah, mine were struggling a little bit for sure. I'm starting to do a little bit more foliar feeding in my garden. I've been lazy about it for like the last 3/4 of a year in terms of foliar feeding, but I'm going to start doing it a little bit more often, especially to get things established.
Yeah, I got to use BTI down here. Otherwise, the caterpillars and the worms from the moths and butterflies just butcher things. I mean, the giant lacewings will come over to the citrus and lay their caterpillars on there, which is, you know, it sucks to see, like, you know, you walk out and you look at your plants and you just see them getting munched away and you're like, what the hell? And then the giant swallowtails, their caterpillars look like poop. They're the bird poop caterpillars. Mm-hmm. So they literally look like shit, and they grow. They get big. Like, you'll get a nice, good old 2-inch looking thing that looks like a little bird turd, mostly brown, has like white end like the bird turd, and they shoot out this little funky red horn to try and scare things away, but they're not poisonous or anything. You know, so I spray things like our peppers and tomatoes and the citrus so that we don't have to deal with any of those caterpillars. But before, when we would get them, we would just remove them and put them somewhere else. Like the swallowtails, they also like the Japanese honeysuckle, which is invasive. But we have plenty of that, and it smells awesome. So, yeah. And then when it comes to the hornworms, I don't really care. They can all. I mean, I like to catch the hornworms when I can, because our box turtles absolutely love to eat them. I mean, they just get super excited for them. And it was funny because when I first started doing it, Jennifer was like, "All right, can you even feed hornworms to turtles?" And I got on my phone and I looked up real quick, and the first thing that popped up was like these kits that you can literally raise hornworm caterpillars for feeding your box turtles. I was like, okay, I think we're good.
That's following your intuition properly. I like it. Cool.
So yeah, we're pretty stoked. I gotta learn this environment a lot better. It's we're doing a little better every year, but it's way different than the Midwest. Like you said, I should be getting a lot of things in the ground in February more often. And the one nice thing though is that with having the long seasons that we do, is I can kind of give myself a little grace. And the summer is a little hot and sunny to do too much, but we have 2 corn seasons, we have 2 tomato seasons, and all those kind of things. So technically we have 2 pepper seasons, even though peppers will go forever, so there's no reason to stop. But so it's pretty nice to be able to, if you miss the boat in springtime because the weather was funky, you can usually kind of ride in on the tail end, as long as the hurricane season isn't too funky.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, a lot of my peppers overwintered. I guess I got like 9 plants now that are overwintered that are producing fruits again. So that's kind of cool. And the one that I thought was Scotch Bonnet is actually a lemon starburst, which is kind of exciting. So.
Oh, cool. Are those from seeds that I sent you?
No, they're from seeds that my buddy in Modesto gave me. So.
Okay, because I grow those lemon starbursts also. They're pretty good. Yeah,
they're cool ones. So I'm excited about that. And my peach ahi seems to have come back too. So, peppers away, and growing a lot of peppers down at helping my friend at his farm. So should be pretty prolific and making some hot sauces this year. I think I'm going to try to do like some sort of like fermented blend hot sauce, just like a specialty one for myself. He just does like one variety, and I think mixing a couple different ones would be kind of cool. Just for, I don't know, I'm more of a hybrid than a straight strain grower myself typically, so I'm pretty sure I'll like the complexity of the flavors.
Yeah, it's fun to mess around with. I mean, because you can get one of those little bullet blenders and just make small batches to try different things, and then write things down. And if you liked it, stick with it and, you know, tweak it or just keep trying wild things. I mean,
if you do blends, people can't copy you as much either. I mean, people can just like grow inferior Scotch bonnets and say they have a Scotch bonnet hot sauce that, you know, somebody might buy for $15 instead of your probiotic hot sauce for $25 or whatever. So, it's, we'll see what happens. Last year, I really wanted to make a lot of hot sauce, and I wound up giving a lot of peppers away, which was kind of great in a certain regard, but I also feel like I wasted some, and I was like, oh, I'll just save the seeds and grow them next year, and I didn't do like the greatest job of starting them early. So, but yeah, you know, it's just nice to be in the garden, and we have some decent shade in the backyard in the hot part of the day, and getting ready to start doing my ice plunges again, and that's definitely like the highlight of the summer for me. That keeps you sane in Sacramento for sure. I don't go for like the 35 degree, but like even like low 40s is perfect in the evening. You know, get 15 minutes in. I find I sleep a lot better and whatnot. So
yeah, we always like to do it like, you know, it's not an ice plunge, but we do it like in the shower. I always turn it off to the ice cold water, but unfortunately, about this time of the year and through the summer, the water on the island is not that cold. So it's literally like, you know, you can put it as cold as you want, and it's still like, oh, you know, it's not hot.
Yeah, I don't get that much cold water. It's interesting. But yeah, what else is going on with you?
Not too much as far as the farm goes. You know, we're waiting for these sunflowers are about to start bursting open their heads, which that's pretty exciting. Get to see like which colors we got going. Should have some nice like black ones and red ones and all sorts of different yellows and mixes in between. So pretty stoked to see those start popping. You know, the kids are on summer vacation now, pretty much. Just got a few more chapters of their math lessons to wrap up before they're completely done and snack machines for the whole summer. But you know, put them to work, have them scoop and poop.
Put them to work.
Yeah. Working on getting our chicken coop built. Definitely got to get some, get our egg production up and raise some meat birds too.
That's cool.
Yeah, you know, I was messing around with Jennifer. We were doing the math. I was like, well, you know, I think I need about 21 chickens for myself per day if I had to eat just eggs. Like if I wanted all my protein in the day to come from eggs. Like, you know, that's not terrible, but that's a lot of chickens to start.
21 eggs per day, you said?
Yeah. Yeah, an egg is about 6 grams of protein. So
theoretically,
aim for about 40 grams of protein a meal.
So eggs used to be 7 grams of protein. When did they go down to 6 grams? Is this like another factor of lack of nutritional density in our food supply, or what?
I would think so, because, you know, I learned the same thing. I used to always say 7, and today was actually the first time I've actually conceded and said 6. But everything that I've been reading has said 6 for a couple of years now. So I would assume it's something to do with, like you said, just overall loss of nutrition and everything. You know, there's glyphosate in organic wine and breast milk. It's not hard to say it's probably affecting birds and stuff. Even more so, you know, when you got it raining down on them and stuff. So, and then it's in the grains that people are feeding them. And
well, yeah, I mean, that's how I knew that consultant that you pointed me in their direction was on the right path, was when we were talking about glyphosates, and he's like, yeah, well, you know, it's like in your water, and, you know, you also DDT in almost every water sample that we test. And so I like stopped him at one point, and I was like, do you think this is just a result of glyphosates in the air we breathe, and the lines in the sky that people talk about and whatnot? Because I didn't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. I never really met this guy before, but he seemed like he was pretty aware, and he's like, oh yeah, he's like, you know, the aluminum and the barium and blah blah blah, and he knew all about it because of doing soil and water tests. And not to laugh, because it's not fucking funny,
right?
But it's the irony of like, these are the people that will admit this sort of stuff because they're finding it and they're having to battle around it. And I remember watching a documentary years ago about chemtrails or whatever they have renamed it to now, and it actually featured a couple people that I know in Maui on it. So I watched the whole thing, and they had tested some, this I don't know if I'd even call him a soil consultant. There's a like a master gardening program in California that you can get a license for, and you have to get like an FBI permit to do it, to get licensed for it. It's pretty crazy. It was one of the reasons that I didn't do it back then. But I was encouraged by a couple people, and this guy was certified in that field, and he tested some soil in Shasta, and he saw that the pH had changed from like 7s to like low 9s in a summer. And he was like, dude, this is totally a result of the chemtrails. And then they tested the soil, and they did find like a lot of aluminum, barium, strontium in it. And that was like the initial dive for me into like, oh, this is an issue. And I think that I've this is probably 10, 12 years ago when I saw this. And I think that I've kind of like buried it in the back of my mind, knowing it, but tried not to admit it because I wasn't really in a position to tackle it. But now, I am in a position to tackle it and help my friend tackle it. And it was interesting what he was saying. He's like, 60% of the problems in soil come from the water. And first thing you gotta do is test the water. And he was, referencing these different chemicals that we're exposed to. I think that's a big thing that a lot of farms don't understand. Like the one thing that I hear people say is, well, I'm on well, so it's all good. I have well water. And I heard this a lot in cannabis too. I got well water. I got spring water. It's all good. And it even made me think to the point when he was explaining this, like I drive out to Stinson Beach and I fill spring water, and, I'll fill like 40 to 60 gallons at a time. And I turn my roommate onto doing it and a few friends. And I try not to tell everybody about it because,
you don't want to wait in line.
The spring. But the reality is that this spring is probably pretty tampered. It's not like the water is going that low. So, how do we get around this stuff? And it's a little overwhelming to think about, especially here in America where we have like 80 times the glyphosate allowance. I think it's 8 parts per million, where it's like, 0.4 or 0.2 in Europe, the consultant was saying to me. So it's 80 times more allowable in the US, which then it's in all these things that we use in agriculture. So, and that's just glyphosate. So that's not aluminum. That's not, DDT residue or whatever else that's coming from the clouds. So how do we get around this? And, you're going to uptake some of it, obviously, but considering maneuvers to avoid it is really a key to creating nutrient-dense food, whether that's in your backyard garden or on a farm or, on a 100-acre plot. So it definitely made me think, like, I'm not a big, for example, wash my fruit person. Like, I'll just grab a nectarine and eat it. But fuck, maybe I should be washing my fruit. That's what we're facing nowadays. So, I don't have all the solutions. I'm gonna work on finding my own solutions for my own microbiome and the environment that the food I eat is raised in. But at the same time, I think asking these questions and developing a little bit of awareness is the first step, shall we say?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely some good ways to address the water. It's kind of like, instead of trying to fix all the water in the world or in your area, is fix the water that you're going to feed your plants. Mm-hmm. And it kind of starts with like what we talked about with the whole well is how deep does your well go? Are you getting, relatively shallow water that's definitely been affected by runoff from all your different areas and other things? Or is it, a deep well where the water has been filtered through limestone layers and other sediment layers that help filter it out? And then, and another thing that some people don't understand is like there's different microbes that can basically contaminate wells that infect iron and sulfur and can do some horrible things for your health too. So you definitely want to get that water tested. But there from there is you don't have to go straight from the well directly to your plants. This is you could, get stock tanks and stuff like that to hold your water and treat it and do things. There's some pretty interesting science talk about how structured water, one of like the fourth phase of water, how it can just allow pollutants to kind of fall out of the water, and it doesn't affect things the same. And I'll try and dig it up so we can bring it up on another episode. But they were doing all these tests with all the different machines and things like that. They claim to structure water and do the different things and energize it. And they actually found that tap water had significantly more energy than any of the machines had when they put it through the cycles that were supposed to structure and energize it. And then they found that ultimately the number one best way to do it, to get energy into the water, was to stir it with a wooden spoon. And it was like really high. I wish I had the side up so that I could show it, but it was a lot higher than any of the machines. So it's definitely cool what we can do with the water, and then treating it, with fulvic acids and things like that, and labs and all sorts of things that will kind of help clean up any contaminants in the water. And then we definitely have to feed the plants too, because like I said, if the water is fucked, the ground's definitely going to be fucked for minerals. I mean, even Dan Kittredge always preaches, you have to get your water right first before you even start spending money on minerals.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. One of the tests that we're going to do is the Morgan test, which is like, they do the old school Morgan test, which is from Kerry Reams, the big. Kerry Reams is a big mentor for Dan Kittredge, and Dan. It sounds like Dan Kittredge was kind of like the young buck at the table when he was meeting with a lot of these like now renowned regenerative people, like well before they were calling it regenerative, so to speak. And it was cool to listen to this consultant, because he's pretty down on regenerative kind of being the next like fail, as far as like organic has obviously failed. If we had to come up with another title for things, and I think there's something to be said for that. I think it's a little bit pessimistic, which I tend to lean into, honestly. But yeah, I mean, when we promote titles for all of these things, it tends to get greenwashed or whitewashed or whatever, and that's why I really like the work that Dan Kittredge is doing with the Bionutrient Food Association, because he's like, well, let's just break it down to nutrient density in our food, right? Because it doesn't need a title. It's just like this food is denser, this food is lower, how is it grown, make your own decisions. And I think that was kind of the basis by which that organic got very popular, and now it's become like, oh, well, I'm rich, so I only eat organic, and I shop at Whole Foods, and people don't understand the difference between different organic crops, whether they're mass produced in the Central Valley or whether they're a backyard farm and somewhere near the coast, or regardless of environment, what you're putting into the crops. And I think that's conceptually what we got to get back to a little bit is our food nutrient dense. And I do try to talk about this as much as possible at the markets, talking about eggs, like, the eggs I sell for our company are 8.5 grams of protein. And they did a study, this organization called the Daily Meal, which you can look up, and they rated the top 20 pasture raised eggs sold in stores in the country. And our company was number 2 on the list, but then they showed the protein content of all of the farms on the list. And I think we're one of the only like certified regenerative ones. But the protein content of our eggs was 8.5 grams, which is awesome. 40% higher than any of the other eggs on the list. And so recently I ran into the woman who's the sister of the brother who was number 1 on the list, which are I'm not going to say the name of the company out of respect for them, but they're based down in like East LA, San Bernardino Mountains. And the guy, to his credit, it sounds like he just started with like a few chickens like you did and turned it into like this decent sized commercial organic pasture raised mobile coop chicken ranch, to his credit. And I've heard other people talk about their eggs, and apparently they're amazing. But they don't have access to green grass year round. And they're in San Bernardino. So about this time of year, mid-May, all their grass starts to go yellow. they're pasturing on ground that if it has grass, the grass is yellow. It's dying and drying out. And I think that this is an important aspect of regenerative, is that as you increase organic matter content, you increase the water holding capacity, and it's something like 27,000 gallons per acre increase per 1% of organic matter. So when we're growing our backyard farms or plots, and we're trying to increase nutrient density, these are the things to consider with biology and minerals. And I don't think they need to sit behind the title of regenerative or organic or biodynamic or Korean nature farming or whatever. I think it's just like, at the end of the day, let's create food that's nutrient dense, and let's create the ability to create food that's nutrient dense for our children, for the next generation. And that's the main thing that scares me. I had a moment this weekend that was really amazing. I had this little girl who shops with her mom frequently at the market, and they get milk. They get just plain milk, and she had brought me like a thing of hot cocoa from Starbucks during Christmas, which was super sweet, like a little gift. And I didn't see them for like several months. And I don't eat hot cocoa from Starbucks, but I wound up packaging it in a care package for a friend of mine in Ukraine and sending it to her because I knew she would really enjoy it. And so then I didn't see them for several months. And when I saw them again, I was like, hey, can I give you something? And I always look at the parent first, because there's parents everywhere, but particularly in San Francisco, who are like, I've never given my kid sugar, right? So I can't just have chocolate milk without knowing it, And I had that happen one day. So I asked the mom, like, can I give her chocolate milk? And she's like, oh, yeah. So I give her chocolate milk. And then this past week, they come back, it was probably 2 weeks later, and she brought me a card and these like Madeleine cookies that I'm sure they baked in a nice little packaging. And then the card had an envelope, and it was really, sweetly written. And, thank you to the milkman, and thank you for giving me the chocolate milk, and blah, blah, blah. And suffice to say, like, these are the moments. I'm not a parent, which I've said before, but I'll reiterate. But these are the moments where I look at these children and I'm like, man, like, what can I do to make your life better? And yeah, in the moment I can give you chocolate milk, but really what I can do is try to further this agriculture movement that I'm a part of, in terms of knowledge and effort and ability to create environments with which you can create foods to battle all of this bullshit that you're being just overwhelmed with in schools and in food and in education and corrupt politics. And it's like, man, it was kind of bad when we were growing up. Like, now, Jesus, it is horrible. And not just in terms of the Cisco food, in terms of the lack of education and the distance, and how we spend all this time on the internet, but it takes us away from the real world. It takes us away from the real interactions. And people have just grown like so lonely and so like out of touch with nature. And I don't see humans surviving that world very long. So, my limited time left, like whatever that is, 10, 30, 40 years, whatever, 5 years, like I want to contribute to a world that creates avenues for them to enjoy some of the things that we did. And that's like pure food that's getting harder and harder to come by.
Well, I think, it's kind of like the silver lining on the big, dark, great thunderstorm of our whole economy and the food industry. But it's that as things get more and more expensive and people have less and less money to buy this junk food anyways, is they're going to be pushed to having to grow their own and raise their own food and whatnot. But, how, like you also brought up, how many people are even going to have the know-how to do so, or even know anybody that can do so. So,
or even recognize the attack that's currently going on the American, not even just the American, the craft farmer worldwide. And we spoke a couple of weeks ago. We didn't really get into it, but I think it's worth sharing. Is the story that the owner of my company shared with me about the 101-year-old dairy farm in Sonoma that recently got shut down because the farmer had to spend in the last few years over $300,000 defending himself in lawsuits on waterways. And some of the statistics that were shared in that article is like, Sonoma is, for those of you not in California, is a big dairy producing climate in California. Clover is based there. Strauss is based there. There's been a lot of family-owned dairy farms in that area for a long, long time. It's got a good amount of green grass, especially in West County, Sonoma, and even into Marin. And so now there's these the county board is coming down on farmers over polluting the waterways for manure from cattle, but yet you don't hear them saying anything about glyphosate's runoff from wineries, which I've actually interviewed to work at wineries that definitely admitted that they use glyphosate. It's very close to the San Francisco Bay and very close to streams that are going out to the ocean. And so, if we're really a society that's conscious of, pollution, i.e. chemicals, I would think that manure from cows is secondary to glyphosates, right? In terms of if we really care about the fish and the wildlife and these environmental organizations. But no, what it is this agenda, I believe, to, institute a world where we have digital IDs and we have, digital currency, and in order to, and universal basic income, and in order to use that universal basic income, when you go to McDonald's in 10 years or 5 years or maybe 2 years, who knows, at the direction of things, you're going to have to flash this digital ID, and it's going to say, okay, well, you had beef 2 days ago.
Right.
So I'm sorry, you can't eat beef again. It's not sustainable for the world environment. And that is the biggest bunch of bullshit going in the world today. Yes, we don't need to eat beef probably 4 times a week. There's, with the population where it is. There's an argument there, which I'd like to learn more about the science of. But to say that the answer is eating crickets and eating impossible meat that's chock full of glyphosates is just control based. It's not based in any form of actual knowledge or health basis, and that's what we're like. And when you and it's starting in Sonoma County, I'm sure it started in Oregon recently. I'm sure many counties around the country are going to get exposed to this ideology. And where is our line? I know where my line is, but I ask people that listen to this, and I ask people all the time at the markets and the different people I get the blessing of interacting with, where is your line? Because these people are taking jets on their own to go to Davos and sit down and eat steak and lobster, and they don't give a fuck about their personal impact. They're trying to judge us and our impact. So where's our line is what I ask you.
Yeah, no, I mean, you drive a good point. I don't remember if it was the New York governor, if it was the New York City mayor, but he was just on recently talking about how the number one thing affecting climate and whatnot was meat consumption. That's definitely, and you also realize what's the number one way to build testosterone in our young men is meat. It's cholesterol mixed with sunlight. So when you're attacking the meat and things like that, then you're definitely attacking the male species for sure. And it's just asinine, when we talk about these crickets and these bug farms, where are these things going to be grown? Well, I can tell you where they're going to be grown in factories. So I mean, there's again a huge carbon footprint just to raise them in factories, like Tyson Chicken, who's on board with raising these crickets and all the other different bugs that are going in cereals and patties and whatnot. And then there's also the fact that all the other crops grown for vegan crops, is still using tractors, and not to mention the death toll that comes from cultivating all that land for all those different crops versus small holistic grazing. So it's just, it's always ironic. There's never any real logic and reason to it when you really start breaking it down.
You don't hear any of these people that are implementing the cricket ideology talk about where they get their meat from. Never once have I heard Bill Gates or Klaus Schwab or Jeff Bezos talk about what they actually eat. So that would be a basic question I would like to ask them in an interview. What do you eat? What farms do you support? Like, what are you about? Like, yeah, we know Trump eats cheeseburgers and drinks Diet Cokes. Okay, cool. But like, what are these world elites when you're going and you're eating in Paris? Like, what are you supporting? Because I know you have think tanks around you. And the hypocrisy is, why should it be different what you put in your body versus what we put on our body? And yeah, these fucks are eating foie gras and whatnot, and which I'm not down with animal cruelty. But like at the end of the day, like I'd like to know, like, are you buying a cow from your neighboring farm? Like where are you getting your ribeye from? And they never talk about it, yet they're telling us what we should be eating. It's fascinating to me. It's like, don't we have the right to ask them that basic question?
Yeah, it's kind of like Steve Jobs wouldn't let his kids get on the iPhones and stuff. It's they know better.
Oh, totally.
But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not one to let someone fuck with my food like that. So between raising chickens and goats are pretty good at reproducing really quickly if you need meat. So that's always an avenue we've looked at. And we're looking at getting closer and closer to homesteading and just pulling the plug on living anywhere close to the city, because it's drab. And it's, people are looking to control it. Like all the legislation they're passing in Sonoma for the dairy farms, and it's literally just for control. They're claiming climate change this and rising seawater this, and yet politicians are still buying oceanfront properties in Martha's Vineyard, and Neil Tyson DeGrasse bought a nice property that's right on the ocean level up there in the Northeast. So these guys must not listen to themselves when they talk about the rising tide, rising ocean levels.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just,
I'll just build walls.
It's comical. It's comical. But the sad part is that, it's through the malnutrition, they're able to produce a large population that just takes it as what it is and listens and runs with it, because they don't have the nutrient-dense food to build the brain cells to actually think about it and break it down logically. I mean, Harvard doctors are coming out saying that our brains, absolutely 100% need animal proteins to survive. And it just kind of further drives home the point when you see malnourished vegans that are just withering away, and they're, ripping their hair out, and their hair's falling out, and they're dyeing it crazy colors. It's kind of the whole concept of what's the first thing that happens to parrots when they start to get malnourished and go crazy. They start pulling out all their hair and shit.
Well, it's like listen to that Tim Dillon interview on Tucker. I thought was really good. I love Tim Dillon. He was talking about, like, they were talking about when you go to the Apple store and all the employees have the nose ring and their hair dyed blue. He's like, so that's the norm. There's no diversity. That's actually become like the norm. And just the way that he phrased it, I thought was really funny, because some of them maybe have different colored hair, sure, but like, the younger generations, like, everybody's got one of their nostrils pierced now. It's just like, okay, that's not like unique anymore. That's like the, having, as a guy, having your left ear pierced when you were, growing up or whatever. In my generation anyway, and a little bit older generation than myself, but it's the hypocrisy of where we're going. It has no end, and I think asking basic questions is a way to subvert it and to plant seeds for people to maybe think about things in different contexts. Because of course, like, to a degree, we're all supportive of the people that are suffering in Ukraine. Okay. But like, nobody said a word about it in Beverly Hills, and they'll step over the homeless person that's like begging for food in front of their apartment door, and yet, like, as soon as it becomes, fashionable. Exactly. Everybody's got Ukrainian flags on their fucking Bentleys.
Instantly.
You know what I mean? And then they're waving them in Congress, which is like illegal. And it's like, listen, I have friends in Ukraine. I'm all for it. But like, let's not pretend that any of the money we're giving them is even going to create weapons. All we're doing is charging them for old weapons. We're not making them any weapons. We're not restocking our own weapons supply for future wars. And, meanwhile, whatever, person in the cabinet is out buying villas in fucking Marseille and, chalets in Switzerland and wherever else in Europe. And people are suffering. And none of the money we're giving them is even going to aid for food. And it's the same thing in Palestine, these different places. So it's like, I heard a metaphor recently where they're like, oh, really, you're anti-war activists. Okay. For Palestine. Awesome. What other wars have you protested? And the college was silent. It's like, you're not a war activist. You're an activist for this particular issue. And sure, that's great. Like, the way we fight the globalist agenda, which is what all of this is, very obviously, is to reach compromise with our fellow brethren from all around the world and say enough is enough, right? Whether it's like attacking our food supply or forcing vaccines down our throat or political ideology or whatever, like, when is enough, right? And when is this? Yeah, there's some issues with the climate. You and I have differed on that a little bit, but I do think there's some issues going on with the climate. But we're not attacking them at their core, and we're allowing corporations to control us through a lack of awareness about what's really behind it. And that's where, for me, the buck has to stop. Like, I'm sorry, like, I want to die a martyr than live like a slave, plain and simple,
Well, it's just, people have to really be wanting to do it. It's one of the saddest things I ever hear is when you hear a grown man say, well, we're not allowed to. I just want to kick him in the nuts and be like, shut up. Mm-hmm. Like, why are you asking permission? If it's going to better your children's life, why do you care what some weirdo in a suit, in a different state or 4 hours away? Who cares what he says? Really? I mean, and if it's really coming down to the fact that if every farm that's raising organic, nutrient-dense food and livestock is facing a raid, then I think we got a serious issue that maybe people should just go ahead and fucking do it anyways, because it's not going to be there very long otherwise. But
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that's kind of what happened during COVID. You look at that one dude who owned the fitness center in New Jersey, who's pretty hardcore conservative. I started following him during COVID. I think his name's like Ian Smith. And like, he was like, yeah, I'm not shutting down my gym. It's like, I'm sorry, people can wear a mask if they come, but I'm still going to let people work out. Like, that goes against my principles. And he wound up like going to the state and, I think even the New Jersey Supreme Court and winning recently. And he's still got more court cases, but it's like he stood up at a time when nobody would stand up, and he went on. I think he went on Tucker Carlson actually on Fox. They were willing to interview him, and I think Tucker was the only person that was willing to talk about it, because he was like really the only person on Fox that was like kind of going against the grain at the time in terms of the whole vaccination and mask wearing shit. And if that hadn't happened, maybe we're all facing a world today where if I wanted to fly to come see you, maybe I have to be vaccinated. And there was a time when I thought that was a fucking reality. And look what fighting did, how far that got us away from that. And whether or not, like, I'm not here to judge people for whether or not they got vaccinated, but I am here to judge people that are willing to give up their personal decision-making ability for their health. Yes, that's a problem. And yes, we need to fight that. And how do we do so? We do so by banding together. There's more of us than there are them. And now, if you look at it 2 years later, after majority of people got their first vaccinations, I think a lot of them that I talk to, I don't bring it up very often, but when it comes up, a lot of them regret their decision. and aren't going back and getting the 6th and 7th booster shot. And those were the people in many cases that were like, oh, you're risking my life by not doing it. And I was like, I'm not going for it. I recently had a woman come up to me that I hadn't seen in like a year and a half. And she had run into another customer, a regular customer of ours from the North Oakland Farmers Market at like the Berkeley Bowl or the local grocery shop. And they brought me up, and they both had known that I didn't get vaccinated. They brought me up in the grocery store, and their aisle conversation was about how I was risking their lives. Right. And she brought it up to me, like after she had the conversation with the woman, she's like, I ran into so-and-so, I think you know her, and we talked about you. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, we talked about your decision. And I was like, my decision? She was like, yeah, your decision not to get the vaccination. And I was like, okay, what was the conversation about? Tell me. And she explained it. And I was like, well, for me, as I explained it to you previously, this goes against everything I ever learned in holistic health up until this point. Like the whole principles about it, the way it was being pushed, it just went against everything I ever learned. And so I said, I'm not going to do it originally. And there was times when I knew I was doing the right thing, but I kind of regretted it because I couldn't go to a restaurant, or I couldn't go to a bar, or I couldn't go to a concert or whatever, or I got asked to get out of my house at a certain point because I was the only one that wasn't vaccinated. But I knew I was doing the right thing. And then about 2 months ago, she came out to me at the Berkeley Market. She passed me a couple times and said hi, and she's very zany, in her 60s or 70s, I see her walking all around Oakland and Berkeley. She's pretty active. She's trying to be healthy, and she buys our milk. And she came up to me, and she's buying the milk. She's like, oh, the milk's great, blah, blah, blah. And I think I converted her from the 2% to the grass-fed milk recently, and so we were talking about that. And then out of nowhere, she goes, you know what? I just have to tell you, I think you were right. And I was like, I was right? I had no idea, And she's like, I think you're right after all. And I was like, you mean about, she's like, yeah, about the vaccinations, blah, blah, blah. I think it looks like you were right. And it probably took a lot for her to say that to me. And I hadn't probably brought up COVID in a month at that point to anyone. It was just out of sight, out of mind. It's just not really something you think about as much living where I do. But I mean, I didn't feel vindicated as much as I was like, cool, well, I hope that planting the seed that I did a year and a half ago opened her mind to other elements of the world. Yeah. Because that was just such a microcosm of this whole thing that we're dealing with. The attack on our personal freedoms, our abilities to rely on our own decision making for our health. And I don't think it's ever been the case where relying on the state to maintain a level of healthiness has been the right move, right? I think for a long time our best interests have not been synchronized with what the state wants us to do.
Well, no. And I mean, that even applies to more than just food. I mean, look at the schools. Homeschooling is kind of a wishy-washy thing depending on what state you're in. A lot of states don't like to give up that control. And it all starts there, where they get into the kids and they push their indoctrination and they push miseducation and they break them. And then you have a bunch of idiot little kids that are just good factory workers, just like, Rockefeller wanted them to be. But
did you know what I heard recently? I heard recently from a teacher. What? I'm not going to say who it was, but she has taught in like 40 public schools in New York and like another 15 in the Bay Area. Okay. And we were having a conversation with her mother and my other friend's mother and my friend. And she was like, do you realize that in public schools, and this happened in Oakland, I'll call it out, that when the kids walk in a group and they all like have to go to the bathroom and they all have to go like to lunch, right? The teacher, and this is maybe a one-off instance, but this is a level of control that we're indoctrinating the children with. It's not a big deal, but they make the kids hold their mouth like this, like blow their cheeks out with air and close their mouth and walk the whole way down the wherever distance from the classroom to where they're going, the bathroom or the gymnasium or the cafeteria. They make them walk like that.
That's crazy.
I mean, I made her repeat herself like 3 times because I was so awestruck by that. I was like, that's fucking Nazi Germany shit. Like,
Yeah.
what is the justification for that? And she was like, control. Merely control.
Well, plus it's just the indoctrination going on. We've got my neighbor's kids over here telling me like 3 years ago that his teachers tell him, all this like pro-gay stuff and tell him, oh, it's cool to be gay, this and that, and don't tell your parents. And you don't talk to your parents about this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's like, what? Like that's alarming. The first time any adult tells a child, don't tell your parents, A, that's go tell your parents. Mm-hmm. And B, you want to get the mob and pitchforks ready and go string that sucker up. But again, it's just crazy indoctrination. And it's in states where they don't want you to have any control over if you can homeschool or not. And people ask, well, how do you do that? How are you doing that without getting the state approved curriculum and going through such and such and such? Last I checked, I deemed the state unworthy of deciding how my child's education went. So I'm surely not going to ask them for permission or for a curriculum for my child. They're not capable of educating children. The schools down here are ridiculous. All the kids go crazy, and half the schools won't go play other schools in sports because there's just, hooligans just breaking things and acting just nonsensical stuff. No respect. Coaches getting hit by players, coaches hitting players and news people. It's just out of control.
My older half brother was a lacrosse coach, and he punched a student in the face and lost his job after being a state championship lacrosse coach. So, I mean, you probably shouldn't hit a 16, 17-year-old kid in the face for sure. But like, at what point when they're talking mad shit and they're strong enough to defend themselves, you say, maybe I need to slap this kid around a little bit. Like, so I mean, and that was
I wrestled.
That was 15, 20 years ago. So,
yeah.
I
mean, I wrestled.
I'm not endorsing that kind of behavior by any means, but yeah, it's, and then in California, like if I'm pretty sure this is the case in California, if you homeschool your children, it's cause for them to be able to search your house, like for them to come. And I don't know if it's no knock warrant or it's like they can get a warrant easily and come in your house, but they're very much trying to impede, and the state wants to see what you're actually teaching the kids. And that it's like, I don't know. We're getting closer and I'm not anti-Chinese, but we're getting closer and closer to China or North Korea. And when I heard that about the kids walking to class, I was like, I wonder if they even do that in North Korea. They probably don't. They probably have other levels of control, but they probably don't do that.
Right.
So
yeah.
But yeah, well, you want to we talk about the fucking Trump verdict or what?
Yeah, I mean we can. I think it's it's a little tongue in cheek. It's kind of like the other topics. We laugh about it and you try. It might not be that funny, but you either laugh or you cry. But I don't really. I know he was found guilty. When I was found guilty, I was put in handcuffs right away. So I don't know what's going on, but it's I definitely think it has more to do, like with the whole elections coming up in November, and if it's going to be a fair election, if it's even going to happen.
The sentencing is 4 days. I did a little research. The sentencing is July 11th, and the Republican National Convention is July 15th. So they're definitely trying to influence that for sure. And I just want to clarify, like, I'm not pro-Trump, right? Like, if I put a gun in my head and I had to vote between Trump and Biden, I would try not to vote still, and then I'd probably
pull the trigger.
I'd probably vote for Trump, because I think there's a better chance of him ending wars and suffering. Biden, I think, is just, Ukraine's going to be an unending war, and Palestine probably will too under Biden. But other than that, like, I think they're about the same. But they are trying to affect his ability to be the Republican choice for whatever reason. All it did was really, I read a bunch of comments under a couple of videos that I watched, and there was a bunch of people that were commenting that were like, yeah, I'm a lifelong Democrat and I'm voting for Trump, or I'm a lifelong independent, I'm voting for Trump now. Like, so it galvanized a lot of people because, what they're weaponizing what they're now calling lawfare, which is the ability to use the law as a method of warfare, which has much deeper connotations than Donald Trump. And I think people that are capable of critical thinking can see that. And there's much worse things that have happened with presidents, even sexual behavior, than what I mean. I watched the documentary recently about Stormy Daniels, and in her words, this wasn't assault, this wasn't rape. Like, she came out of the bathroom and according to her, and he was like wearing boxers, but she didn't say it was even non-consensual. She didn't say she loved it, but like, so I mean, paying her off to keep her mouth shut, maybe that's illegal. I think it's very debatable. Sounds like
Well,
they
they
turned
use
several misdemeanors into a felony offense so that they can implement the new terminology, which is convicted felon. And what I did see in a couple things was people betting, I think, on PBD and a couple other things. How many times do you want to bet in Biden's debate with Trump or whoever he debates with that they're going to bring up the term convicted felon? Is it every minute? Is it 100 times? Is it 20 times? I put the over under about 30 that's going to be the new term. And then they showed a video clip of like going through all the left media celebrating this win in court against the evil Donald Trump. And all of them said convicted felon. All of them. So,
mind you, this is from the party that wants to always preach that all these convicted felons that are minorities and whatnot are all disparaged and so oppressed, and there's injustice because they're constantly referred to as felons. That they're now they're pushing to change the lingo for inmates, from inmates to justice challenged individuals or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just crazy to see the hypocrisy and
we're not even checking to see if we're letting in convicted felons that we're trying to utilize to sway the election and give the rights to vote, even though convicted felons like myself can't vote. But there's people that come in that are international criminals that we're letting in this country, and we're just giving green cards or US IDs to, voting IDs to, and we're letting them vote.
And they're also getting jobs at Tyson Chicken, who, laid off all their workers who refused to get COVID vaccinations, and now who also just happen to be producing bugs and farming bugs, is hiring all these illegals.
And I doubt they're enforcing vaccines on them either. I doubt they're enforcing vaccines on them.
But, that's because the good red-blooded Americans that refuse to let someone else do the thinking for them also wouldn't sit by and watch Tyson Chicken pack bugs into shit. So you got to get those guys out of the way, and now bring in all these people who fucking hate us anyways and don't give a shit and want to see it all go down. So,
I mean, it's I have a hard time trusting people that still have faith in the left, and that has very little to do with the decision by the courts yesterday. I really have a hard time in this. I try to keep an open mind and talk to family members of mine about this and stuff, but I'm just like really nervous that people can't see this. And I'm not right leaning. I very much feel like I'm in the center. I try to promote radical thought process, but what is going on in this country is so extreme right now. And I just I can't conceptualize how you can endorse this sort of behavior. I just can't.
Yeah. I mean, it goes across the board, even into like Republicans or right wing or whatever you want to call it. It's, there's the bottom line is that it's just a bunch of fucking egomaniacs that are half-blown narcissists running this country, and it's basically just a bunch of people trying to make it like an after-school special. They're all still playing the same high school politics and bullshit popularity games and this bullshit and that bullshit, and trying to get people to hate so-and-so and hate these people and vote this way or vote that way. But bottom line is they all go down and have dinner and drinks together at the end of the day and laugh about it. They don't give a fuck about any of this shit going on. like you said, they're not eating the crickets. They're eating good food and drinking filtered clean water and the top of the line spirits and flying wherever they got to go to get it. So,
well, and I think that like they're setting it up to place the blame. I think that's really what it comes down to. Like whatever happens, we're gonna limp through November, right? And there's gonna be more crazy shit happens, but we're probably gonna limp through November, and then if Trump does get elected as a convicted felon, then we can blame him entirely for the economic meltdown that we've been putting off continually. We can blame him, and it won't be the blame on. We can't blame the immigrants and whatnot. And that's the Ed Dowd was talking about this morning, and I thought he made a really good point as far as that goes. And it really seems like when you watch the timeline, that's kind of what they have to do, because even when like McCarthy voted to extend the debt ceiling most recently, and he went against all the Republicans, like Ed Dowd was saying, like they probably tapped him on the shoulder and were like, look, dude, if you don't do this, we're having full on economic meltdown like right now. Like we're barely holding the bricks together right now. And we're just trying to time it to where when it does happen, we can put the blame in the right direction. And I think that's obviously got to be a degree of what's happening right now, because I
would think so, somewhat. I don't really think we're going to get to the election, but we'll see. I mean, I think it's whatever happens. I think shit's going to hit the fan. I think it's all in line for the United Nations nonsense to get put in play more. But because the left's just inept. I mean, who in their right mind is really going to vote for Biden? There's, I could see it if they put someone else in there, like, somehow pulling it off. But the bottom line is everyone's probably still going to be voting on Dominion machines. And it's just hopeless, in my opinion. It's not broken. It's designed this way.
PBD did a poll, and they were talking about how there's about 4% of people that were like, I absolutely will not vote for a convicted felon. And then the 80% were like, it doesn't sway me that much either way. And then 16% were like, I'll have to think about it. But like 4% of 75 million is like, of the people that voted for Trump last time, that's like 3.2 million people. But then I also think they weren't counting like the people that are going to be galvanized as independents or on the left that just kind of see the manipulation of the judicial system, which is kind of the last thing that we have left to stand behind. There's been a few topics in the last couple of years that have like gone to the Supreme Court, like COVID, where there wasn't any level of rationality until there was a little bit shown by the Supreme Court. And that is kind of, the hallway we're walking down right now is okay. Well, can we have the ability to see that we can't we can't dissolve our judicial system, because that's the backup plan, as it were. And I don't know. I don't like playing on the judicial,
but it's not being forced.
But it's about the only hope we have left.
Yeah, and it's just not being enforced properly. The government's supposed to be there for us to protect us and to preserve our rights, not for us to protect them and them to tell us what rights we have. The Supreme Court's there to protect our rights, not for us to have to beg for if we can do this or can't. Is this supposed to be allowable?
Well, in a democracy, we're supposed to be able to vote for our rights. But now with censorship, it's like, oh, well, we can't trust the people to decide for themselves, so we have to decide for them. So we've allowed it to get completely inverted in the last 20 years.
And we're not even a democracy. We're a constitutional republic, and they keep trying to hide that fact. And you got politicians trying to get rid of the Constitution now. They're trying to get rid of it. Oh, it's just old pieces of paper. What does it mean? So.
Well, that's what lost me on Obama, was just the deconstruction of I was a big fan of Obama for the first, when he ran and the whole time for change, and I had hopes for him and whatnot, and he seemed like he was a man of the people. And then within about the first year, when I saw the deconstruction of the Constitution and the kickbacks to Wall Street, I was like, wait, this guy is questionable. And then I really started looking into stuff, and I started paying attention. I started paying attention to the Constitution and things of that nature. And I said, wait a second, like, and I started to develop the mindset of like, it's all the same team. It's just really these people don't have the common person's best interest in mind, and whether they're globalists or they're, however you want to describe someone that claims to be anti-globalist like Trump, like they're still part of the elite, and they don't have the common person's best interest in mind, and they're not promoting a world where we're able to make decisions for ourselves as the population. Like, if we outvote the other side, then we get our way, or if the other side outvotes us, and they get their way. And I don't know that we're ever getting back to that. I think it's just I think economic downturn is gonna influence us to give up more of our personal rights, unfortunately. And I think that it's a minor decision, kind of, in terms of hush money with Trump and this whole thing, but it's major in terms of what it represents in terms of the manipulation of the judicial system. And I'm glad that there's a lot of people out there that are recognizing that.
And using the term hush money in and of itself is really kind of a fluff word to kind of invoke emotion out of people, because otherwise it's just what do they call it when you non-disclosures and things like that, like it happens NDAs, all the time. NDAs. But when it's somebody you want to defame, it's hush money.
Can we investigate all the politicians in Ukraine and where they're getting their money from and what they're doing with it?
Right, and it isn't Ronnie's.
We're paying taxes on it. I pay taxes on that. Why can't I find that out?
Right, and Ronnie's kid works over there, and there's a Pelosi over there, and there was a Biden over there at one point. So it's don't tell. What's good for us is not good for you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, on that note, let's reconvene here next week and proceed forward, and hopefully find some more positive, non-political things to discuss. I just felt like we should probably into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an elephant in the room with the whole Trump thing, and people getting a little more sovereign when it comes to their food is a really important thing, and knowing certain things when it comes to how to do so is really important. So no matter how gloomy it is, it's still something that we have to face. You can't hide problems. They don't stay under the bed.
And I definitely believe that, like, becoming more sovereign with your food and aware of your food sources helps you become more knowledgeable in all these other aspects. Like, I would say most of the knowledge that I've gleaned has come from like being aware of food. You know what I mean? So it's like kind of a core, not only is it fuel for our systems, but it's a core element of how we, stabilize the rest of the aspects of our lives.
Yeah. And when you're trying to create your own food, it's pretty easy to see the war on food and nutrition, because they even come at the homeowners. So kind of wakes you up that people are that serious about making sure you're not getting their food like that what's on the other side is not good for you.
Well, and it also makes us that they're intimidated of our mindsets and of our ability to have critical thinking. That's something that we can still control. So let's figure out how to do that. And that starts with the nutrition we put in our body, but it also, regardless of your political affiliations, like, it just starts with, like, caring about your neighbor and having discussions and not being more comfortable living in the matrix and living outside of it.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing about Tucker Carlson, is always promoting dialogue, just talking to people and not being an echo chamber where you just hear somebody repeating the same shit you say, but actually, conversing with people and hearing other people's perspectives.
Yeah, he's a good listener. He's a very good listener. I'll give him credit on that.
For sure. But yeah.
Well,
great seeing you.
Thank you for your time. Yeah, great seeing you too.
Great talking this week. Glad to get back at it.
Yeah. We'll talk again more this week, and we appreciate all of your guys' time and joining us. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks for spending your time. Have a great one. Peace.